This is video number 2 on how to implement a more conversation-based selling approach. In this video, we will outline and explain the sales process that is the foundation for the conversation-based selling approach. And this sales methodology uses a 3-step sales process with, of course, the centerpiece of that sales process being the conversation. And so in this video, we will go through each of these steps one by one, starting with the initial contact. This is the first step of the sales process, and this is basically the first time that you are interacting with the sales prospect. And one of the most common ways that you might be able to picture the initial contact is picking up the phone and cold calling a prospect. The initial contact could also be a cold email that you send to a prospect. It might also be meeting a prospect at a networking event. And when the product selling salespeople are interacting with prospects at the initial contact step, they are usually always trying to sell the product. And with the conversation-based selling approach, we are going to avoid that. And instead of selling the product, the goal of the initial contact step is to sell the conversation. And when you successfully close the prospect on talking more, then you progress to the conversation step of the sales process. And this can usually look like you scheduling and having an appointment with a prospect, or scheduling and having a meeting with a prospect. In today's day and age of working remotely and virtually, the conversation could be having a call or an online meeting or a Zoom meeting with a prospect. And our goal in the conversation is still not to try to sell the product and close the prospect on buying the product that we sell. The goal of the conversation is to sell the next step in the process, which is the explanation step. The explanation step of the sales process is your main opportunity to explain to the prospect how you can help them and explain the product that you have to offer, what it does, how it works. Now, the product selling salesperson might try to take care of that in the conversation, but we've broken this out as 2 separate steps because the conversation should be spent mostly on learning about the prospect. And it's only after you learn about the prospect and maybe identify that they fit well with the product or service that you sell that it would then make sense to progress to a step where you can explain what you have to offer and how you can help the prospect. And in most cases, the explanation sales process step could be a presentation of what you have to offer, what your product is, how it works. It might be a demonstration of your product. Although for some products and services, there might not be a lot of demonstration or explanation needed because maybe you sell a product or service that is very commonly known or frequently purchased by the prospects that you're selling to. In that case, the explanation step might be you delivering a proposal or a quotation or presenting a list of options that the prospect could choose from if they wanted to purchase what you have to sell. So those are the 3 main sales process steps of the conversation-based selling approach. Now, you might look at these and see them as different steps that happen on 3 different days. And for most products or services, that's usually a pretty good way to go. But there are scenarios where these steps can get squeezed together and happen on the same day and at the same time. For example, in a lot of cases, you might actually have the initial contact and the conversation at the same time on the same day. For example, you might cold call a prospect and end up having a very good and long conversation with the prospect where you end up talking to them for 20 or 30 minutes. We actually refer to this scenario as an instant meeting. And in most cases, I believe that salespeople accidentally fall into having instant meetings with prospects in situations where maybe the prospect asks a few good questions. And because the salesperson gets excited about having a prospect ask questions, the salesperson then answers the questions of the prospect and then slides into having the conversation right there at the same time. And in that scenario, it probably would be better for that salesperson to realize that they are progressing from the initial contact and moving to the conversation sales process step. And it would probably be in the salesperson's best interest to prevent that from happening by holding off on answering the prospect's questions questions by maybe saying something like, you know what, that's a really good question. Why don't we schedule a call maybe next week where we can dig into those details and answer any other questions you might have? By the salesperson doing this and drawing the line, he or she is most likely to get more time and attention with the prospect. Now, of course, there could be scenarios where it makes more sense to go ahead and have instant meetings in situations where maybe the product or service being sold is not very complex and there's not a lot to talk about and a lot of information to learn about the prospect or information to share about the product or service. Or maybe you've gotten a very difficult to get a hold of person on the phone and you don't know if you'll be able to get back in front of them or get them back on the phone, and you might just want to get as much as you can out of them at that exact moment. For those scenarios, try to have instant meetings. But if those factors are not involved, try to keep the two sales process steps separate. There also could be scenarios where your conversation and explanation happen at the same time, and we refer to this as an instant explanation, where you're having the conversation with the prospect and then you naturally progress into explaining how you can help and what you have to offer. An example of this might be you're in an appointment with a prospect, you learn a little bit about their needs, and then you jump into throwing up some slides on your product or service or opening up a brochure and going into detail on explaining what you have to offer. For most cases, you'll likely get more attention in that explanation step when you schedule that out as a presentation or a demonstration on another day. Now, you might see these 3 sales process steps and say, well, that really doesn't apply to me because what I sell is very simple and I usually sell it over the phone or in just talking with a prospect for the first time. And in that case, I would say you could still go through these 3 sales process steps in the same interaction. For example, you might cold call a prospect and ask them a question or two. That's the initial contact cold call step. Based on how they answer your question, you identify that it might make sense to talk more and you close them on talking more for another 5 to 10 minutes. And then you identify that they do fit with what you have to offer. And then you present them with 3 different packages that would fit well based on their needs. That would be you progressing to the explanation step. And then you close them on one of the packages that you have to offer. That would basically be a one call close. And that progression that I just shared with you would be you going through all 3 of these steps in the same interaction. And I believe if you divided that one interaction into these 3 steps, you would improve your ability to have control over the sales process that you're trying to take the prospect through, and you would likely improve your ability to communicate with prospects, build interest, and close more of those deals. So hopefully you can see how these 3 steps can improve and simplify how you sell and help you to implement more of a conversation-based selling approach. In the next video, we will talk about how the conversation-based selling approach can completely change how you approach cold calling, and we look forward to seeing you there.